Alan, in his books, actually explains this process absolutely brilliantly. He says that if you're wearing a pair of really tight shoes, it feels fantastic at the end of the day when you get to take them off. But if you think about it, all we're really enjoying there is feeling normal again. I mean, this is not a good reason to go around wearing tight shoes, just because it feels a bit better when you take them off. It would be a bit like me, I don't know, banging my head against a brick wall because it feels a bit better when I stop. Let me show you exactly what I mean here. Let's say that before we started smoking, we were all normal. When we put out our first cigarette, the nicotine started to leave our body, which put us down here with this slightly empty feeling. By smoking a second cigarette, the nicotine was restored and the empty feeling went away, leaving us once again feeling normal. But as soon as we put out that cigarette, the nicotine began to leave the body, and soon we're back down here again with a slightly empty feeling. Bear in mind that this is all happening at such a low level, our conscious brains are not even aware of it. When we smoked a third cigarette, the nicotine was once again restored and we felt normal again. But the same thing happened, and soon we were back down here, feeling a little empty again. Now, fairly early on in our smoking lives, when we light a cigarette, we don't quite get back to normal. The reason for this is, like with every other drug on the planet, we begin to create some tolerance or immunity. Most people who drink alcohol will be familiar with this concept. When you were a young drinker, you probably felt the effects of alcohol after just a couple of sips, whereas now it might take a few drinks. And it's the same with smoking. I'm not particularly concerned whether it's the 3rd or the 30th or the 300th cigarette. I'm just saying that at some point fairly early on in your smoking life, this cigarette has slightly less of an impact than the one before it. But of course we withdraw from it all the same, leaving us in a situation where we now need to smoke more to feel normal, or as close to normal as we'll ever feel again when we continue to smoke. Unfortunately, the more you smoke, the less effect each cigarette has. And this illustrates perfectly the process by which we become addicted and begin to believe that some cigarettes provide some sort of benefit or pleasure. It's also gradual, isn't it? And you never get the feeling that you're out of control. We smoke a bit when we're younger, and very gradually the cigarette begins to take over. The first time you realize you have a problem is the first time you try to quit and find you can't. And it's often years after someone starts to smoke. Now, I think there are a couple of very interesting things we can learn from this diagram. The first and most obvious is that the cigarette never makes you feel better than a non-smoker. We are only ever trying to get back to where we were the whole time before we got addicted. And to be honest, this is a very common theme with drug addiction. We do our drug to remove the symptoms of withdrawal, and in so doing, temporarily get to feel like someone who doesn't do the drug. The second thing we can see is that as long-term smokers, we now spend so much of our lives down here that we think it's normal. What we forget is that we should be up here. And this is the journey that you are about to start, the journey back to normality. The third thing to notice about this diagram is that, in common with other drug addicts, smokers ever only acknowledge the illusory boost that the cigarette gives us. Here, and here, and here. What we very conveniently forget is that it was the previous cigarette that put us down there in the first place needing a boost. Obviously, non-smokers don't need this boost because they're up here the whole time feeling normal. When I look at this diagram, I'm often reminded of John Steinbeck's amazing book of Mice and Men. There are two friends, Lenny and George, and Lenny idolizes George because George saved him from drowning. But what he forgets is that it was George that pushed him in the first place. It's exactly the same with smoking. We give the cigarette the credit for making us feel a bit better when we should be blaming the previous one for making us feel lousy in the first place. But the worst thing for smokers is that at some point along this line, there comes a time when you realize, usually with a sinking heart, that you no longer smoke when you want to, or because you want to. You smoke because you can't stop. And as soon as we realize this, We start looking for ways to escape. I want to return for a moment to those so-called special cigarettes. If you're talking to a heavy smoker, as obviously we do on a fairly frequent basis, and if they're being honest with you, which isn't really only always the case, they'll tell you that out of the, say, 30 or 40 a day they smoke, that they only really enjoy, and I use the word enjoy in the loosest possible sense, that they only really enjoy 2, 3, 4, absolute maximum 5 cigarettes a day. We always ask such smokers the same question. If you only really enjoy 3 or 4, let's call it 5 a day, then why bother smoking the other 35? Actually, this is a very, very, very good question. Bear in mind, we're not telling these guys to stop smoking. We're just telling them to stop smoking the ones they don't enjoy. Can't do it though, can you? At this point, some smokers will mumble something about habit or something like this, but, you know, I don't buy it. I mean, don't misunderstand me. I think there is a lot about smoking that is habitual. But smoking itself is not a habit. And even if it was, why would it be so difficult to break? I mean, we make and break habits all the time, don't we? I mean, I live here in North America, and obviously I drive on the right. But I fly to the UK several times for meetings and conferences and so on, and I pick up my hire car at Heathrow, and I drive on the left. I'm in the habit of driving on the right, but I change that habit. And when I get back home, I change it again. There's no mental anguish, there's no physical torture involved. It's a habit. You change it back. If smoking was a habit, why would it be so difficult to change? Let's think about it this way. Let's assume for a minute that you work with someone who is, I don't know, a crack addict, say. And they say to you, at 10 o'clock in the morning I smoke crack because I'm an addict. At 12 I smoke it because I'm an addict. At 2 I smoke it because I'm an addict. But at 4 o'clock I smoke crack because I really enjoy it. Would you believe this person? Of course not. It's really so obvious when you look at other people's addictions, isn't it? Well, how can we smoke this cigarette to relieve stress, this one to keep you thin, this one to relax you? They're all identical. Can you see the connection between smoking crack and smoking tobacco? It's all of the addiction, just with none of the high. And you really need to get this crystal clear in your mind. You didn't get addicted to nicotine because you got into the habit of smoking. It's the other way around. Because very early on in your smoking life, you became physically addicted to nicotine. You had to build a smoking habit to service that addiction. In most cases, the cigarette very subtly comes to control every aspect of your waking life, and you actually end up designing your whole life around your need to smoke. It dictates where you go, what you do, who you see, who you avoid seeing, where you eat, where you drink, where you work, where you go on vacation. And once you begin to sense this, frankly, you can't even pretend to enjoy smoking anymore. It's slavery, pure and simple. I thought that the main benefits of stopping smoking would be health and money. And while these two things improved very, very dramatically when I quit smoking, it has been the many other smaller things that I never associated with smoking that, ironically, I've ended up enjoying the most. For example, my energy levels. When I was a smoker, I just never had any energy. I would wake up tired, drag myself through the day. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I could have gone down and had a nap. Like a toddler. Yet this was a 20, 30-year-old man supposed to be in the prime of life. It was crazy. About the 3rd day after I quit smoking, I woke up crackling with energy. I felt like a cell phone that had been charged up overnight. It felt absolutely fantastic. And those energy levels have stayed with me until this day. And people talk about putting weight on when they stop smoking. I lost tons of weight. I lost 35 pounds in the first 4 months after I quit smoking. You see, I had never thought about the impact that smoking had on other areas of my life. For instance, I was a terrible eater when I was a smoker. I mean, I guess it's because smoking had compromised my sense of smell and taste. So I tended to eat foods that were very high in salt, very high in sugar, very high in fat. I mean, these were the only foods I could taste, really. And of course, I never wanted to stop and prepare fresh fruit and vegetables and so on, because it interferes with your smoking time. So I used to eat a lot of food on the run, a lot of junk food, a lot of fast food. And of course, this is the worst kind of food for you. I also drank way too much when I smoked. I had 2 young girls, and there was no way I would smoke in the house with my girls there. And there's no way I'm going to stand outside and smoke in a 10-degree northeastern winter. So I used to go up to the village pub and smoke. And I would sit there in this pub 7 nights a week and drink 5-6 pints of beer every single night, just so I could be somewhere where I could smoke. Don't laugh. I mean, 86% of alcoholics are smokers. It really makes you wonder which one is driving which. When I quit smoking, I cut down my drinking, I would say, by around 90%. Because I realized that 90% of my drinking was just so I could be somewhere where I could smoke. And when you're smoking between 2 and 3 packs a day, you will understand me when I tell you that exercise wasn't particularly high up on my agenda. So when I quit smoking, and my taste, my senses and smell of taste woke up, I started eating properly. I mean, it wasn't a conscious decision. It just kind of happened that way. I more or less gave up junk food. I stopped consuming these vast quantities of alcohol. And because I had energy, and for the first time, self-esteem to want to improve myself, it really motivated me to get up and get exercising. And to be honest with you, the weight fell off me. I felt like $1 trillion. I really did. But there were tons of other things about smoking as well. In winter, I could never get my fingers and toes warm. They'd be like little blocks of ice. This is the impact of smoking on the circulation, actually. I mean, I never really realized this, but smoking thickens the blood. It coagulates the blood, and it puts a thick layer of plaque around our veins and our arteries and our capillaries. And so your poor heart is trying to pump this ever-thickening gunge through these ever-narrowing vessels, and it just can't reach the extremities. I mean, when I was a smoker, I could never get warm, and as a non-smoker, I just never get cold. It's the difference is like night and day. But to be honest with you, I don't need to see a smoker light up to know that they're smokers. I mean, the vast majority of smokers I can tell just by their complexions. Smokers have a slightly greyish complexion to them. Because what has happened is the capillaries taking the blood to the face get blocked. And that's what gives smokers this slightly greyish colour. But the great news is that after 2-3 days, the capillaries open up and the blood comes back to the face, and the complexion changes, in some cases very dramatically, actually. And ignore these old wives' tales about every cigarette you smoke taking 7 minutes off your life, or whatever it's supposed to be these days. I once had dinner with Alan Carr, and we sat down and worked out on the back of a napkin that with the amount he smoked, he should have died in 1971. And, well, he looked pretty good for a dead guy, I can tell you. The truth is that unless you've already been diagnosed with a smoking-related disease or condition, then your health recovers extremely